Welcome to this Photoshop crash course. At the beginning of my big Adobe classes, I like to actually do a quicker crash course for you if you want to just get in there and start making things, start being creative, rather than watching step by step the entire process of these amazing applications. So that's what this crash course is, and by the end of it you'll be able to create your own designs completely from scratch like these. So what and how are you going to be learning this in Photoshop? You're going to learn how to start a project, how to import and resize images, how to understand the interface so you don't get lost, working with layers, which is the one panel within Photoshop you'll be spending a lot of time in. In this video, you're also going to learn some of the generative AI features within Photoshop that have been added over the past couple of years, important tools that you'll be using often, blend modes, opacity, layer styles, how to save and export your projects to share them with the world. And as I mentioned, you'll be putting this all together with these real-world project demos. So we're going to start with the quick-ish overview of Photoshop and then move on to putting it into practice. And this is just a number of additional specific techniques and skills you'll be learning right here in this crash course. So if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. There are going to be things that I do not cover in this crash course that will be covered in much more depth throughout the full course. My goal is to help you get started with Photoshop as quickly as possible, and that's what this crash course is here to do for you. When you first open up Photoshop, you'll see their welcome page. It's on the Home tab, which will include any recent projects that you've worked on, as well as any latest news or features that Photoshop has added up at the top. If you have never opened a Photoshop project or created one, you'll need to create a new file, which is up here on the top left. Here opens up a window where you have a number of preset options for different sizes, for example, for print or different photo sizes, different popular web sizes, or as you see as well, if you've created different projects in the past, recent sizes. You can also customize your size and shape of your canvas, the project that we're going to be working on over here. So if you want to create a square project, for example, a square image, you might want to create it 2000 by 2000 pixels. 300 resolution is a very high quality resolution that would be great for both print but also sharing online. And just a quick tip, if you find yourself creating projects with the same settings, you might want to save it as a preset by naming it and clicking to save that as a preset here. Once you're happy with your settings, just click Create, and that's going to open up Photoshop. Now the layout of your screen should look something like this. If it doesn't, go up to the Window menu. Under Workspace, make sure you're on the Essentials workspace, and if it still doesn't look exactly like this, choose Reset Essentials. However, it should look like this when you open up Photoshop for the first time. We'll go over this layout and a little tour in just a minute, but in this next section, I want to talk about adding images to a project. There's several ways to add an image that you want to work with to a project, but the easiest is simply to find it in your documents and drag it onto this canvas. So here are some photos that you can get from the downloadable resources of this project. So simply choose one of these images. These are all copyright-free images that I found from unsplash.com. Thank you to the photographers for providing these images for our practice. And now you can see it is on our canvas. You'll also notice something over in the bottom right, which we'll talk about in more depth, the layer panel. It has added this as a layer. So you might be happy with where this was placed or the size of this image, but if not, you can take your mouse and you can hover over this bounding box, which is this box with these little squares, and you can resize. So if you take a corner in or out, you can resize it. if while you're doing this, you hold the Option key on a Mac, Alt on a PC. If I ever say Option on a Mac, it means it's Alt for a PC. It will scale from the center. You can do this with any of these parts of the image. Now, if you're trying to stretch or squeeze an image, you can press the Shift button, and that allows you to stretch or squeeze it. But I'm going to undo that, Control Z or Command Z on a Mac. To rotate an image, hover your mouse over one of the sides, and you can see how it changes to this little rotation icon, and you can rotate it. Holding Shift allows you to rotate it at specific points, 60 degrees, 45, 30, etc. And once you're happy with the positioning, which can always be changed later, just press the Return key on your keyboard, and that sort of sets it in place. If I go back to my Finder, and let's go ahead and choose one of these other images, you can see that I can drop this onto my canvas. I can resize it. Say we want this to fill up the whole project. We can do something like that. Press Return to place it, but now it's on top of our other image. And over here on the layer panel, we can see that it is above our meditating image. To change the order, simply drag it down below. Now that you know how to open and start a project and place some images, let's go over the interface of Photoshop so you know a little bit where things might be. Now, there are so many tools in Photoshop, and many that you might never ever use. There are going to be some tools and panels and things that you use on a day-to-day basis, like myself though. And we'll cover the most important ones. So in the middle, we have, this is our canvas. So this is where we're going to be working on our image. It's the size of the design that we created initially. This can also be changed later, but right now it's just that 2000 by 2000 pixel project, which we can see down here in the bottom left. On the left-hand side, we have all of these tools. These are different tools that allow us to do different things. Hovering over them will give us more detail about what they are. There's tools like text and shapes and clone stamping and selections, all kinds of good stuff we'll be going over later in this video. Up at the top, we have some different options that will change depending on what tool we have that we're using. Now, the one tool I want to mention right now is the Move tool. This is sort of your main tool. It's sort of just like your mouse that can click and grab and move things around, and it's the default tool that you'll want to go back to, because if you're in one of these other tools, then it might make an adjustment while you're clicking around. I have my file menu hidden up at the top, but if you see this at the top, you will find a lot of different options up here as well. Things like filter, the window that we saw earlier that allows us to open up all kinds of other panels and options if you want to adjust your screen depending on what types of things you do. Like if you're always doing photography or painting, you might want to choose a different workspace. But for now, we're going to leave it as the default. Moving around to the right-hand side, we have these panels on the right that we can adjust. So some of these we can make bigger or smaller depending on what we like to use or what we need in our view more prominently. For example, at the very bottom, we have the layers, and this is where I spend a lot of time adjusting layers, making adjustments to these layers, reordering them, and you have a lot of options down here at the bottom as well that will help us make our designs, create new layers as well. Trash layers, all kinds of good stuff down there. But back up at the top, we have our color picker, swatches, gradients, patterns. These are how we will choose colors for fonts and shapes and things like that. Below this, we have properties, which you can see if I change to a different layer, you can see the properties. I often actually don't really use this properties panel. So what I might do is just close this by right-clicking and choosing close that tab. But I do have this adjustments open now, and so that's how this works. We can also reorder these tabs if we want to by clicking and dragging. And the adjustments is how we can make different adjustments to layers, like changing the brightness or the curves or levels, and we'll go over that in the future. I also might just want to have my layers panel open by itself without these up here. And so having something like this might be a good default view for me. All of this can be adjusted. And the one other thing I'll mention about this interface for now is this little toolbar right here. This has things like the history, where we can jump back in time to a previous spot of our edit. We can also add things to this toolbar. For example, if we go up to window, we can add character. And now we have all the options for our text. So we can change things like font size, and you can open up these little windows with this button, which I think is super helpful. One last thing that I want to mention, which you might see that I have turned off right now, if I go up to window, look and see where contextual taskbar is. This is a bar that is a recent Photoshop update. You can move it around, and depending on what you have selected, it will give you different options. It's contextual. And so for things like this photo of this lady meditating, there is an option for selecting the subject, removing the background. This is where we're going to be doing a lot of Gen AI stuff within our projects. And so if you don't see that, make sure you check window and contextual taskbar to turn that on or off. We'll be seeing how that works in the future. All right, so that's enough with the overview. We'll learn more as we work through this crash course. In this next section, I want to talk more about the layer panel. So let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see more. You'll notice that we have this background layer that is automatically created whenever you create a new project. I can turn off the visibility of any layer by unchecking this eyeball, and we can see that the background is just this white layer. We don't necessarily need this, and to delete it, what you have to do is select it and press delete on your keyboard or the back arrow, or press the trash can over here. You can also see that this layer is locked. For this background layer, it means that if I unchecked that lock, which you can turn on again up here, I can now move this background around. And that's going to be the same with any sort of layer. So let me delete that layer right there. If I turn on this meditating layer and now I lock it, it means that I can't click and select it. See how I can't click and select it? And because my cloud layer is not visible, it's not allowing me to select it either. But with the clouds layer on now, I can select and move this around. So if you have a layer that you don't want to touch, you can lock it, or you could just turn off the visibility. We already learned about reordering layers, but another organization method is to group layers. Sometimes I end up with a project where I have dozens of layers, and it gets sort of daunting, sort of scrolling through and finding the right layer. So to organize layers, you can actually group them. So you can select multiple layers. You can group them with this little file group button down here. Undo that. We can also do that by selecting these layers, or whichever layers you want, and choosing new group from layers. Select OK. You can also rename it if you want. And now these layers are in this group. You can move layers out of a group, reorganize them in different groups, but it's just a way to keep your layer panel more organized. With the group or any of these layers, you can rename them. So you can just double click into the title or the text and then give it a new name. So sometimes instead of creating a brand new Photoshop project, if I am creating a series of social media graphics, for example, I might just put all of my designs into different groups in this one Photoshop project. I'm going to actually remove these layers by selecting them and taking them out of the group. There are a lot of other things we'll cover with the layer panel in the future, but the last thing for now is how to create a new layer. So if you click this little plus button, it creates this blank layer. Right now, there's nothing happening with this layer. If I turn off these other layers, you can see there's nothing happening. And if you ever see this checkerboard pattern, it means that there's nothing there. Right now, it's transparent. But there's lots of ways to add things to this layer that we'll see in the future. Another way we'll create a new layer is with certain tools like our shape tool here. If you select that tool and then we use it by clicking and dragging on our design, you'll notice that it creates a new layer. That was an ellipse or like a circular object. I'm going to delete that. You'll notice that under this tool, if I click and hover over it, there are other options. So under shape, we have rectangle. So if we wanted a rectangle instead of an ellipse, we have to choose that right tool. With many of these tools, if we click and hold, we'll see different options. So with the shape tool selected with the rectangle option, now I can click and create another rectangle, and it appears here as a new shape, and I can again drag it down underneath this layer. Now creating that opened up this properties tab. I'm going to go ahead and close that again. I would want to go back to my move tool to move things around, because if I try to click and drag again, look what happens. It creates another shape. Once you're done creating shapes or new layers, you want to go back to the move tool, and from here we can then move this shape around again. And that's a bit more about our layer panel. In this next chapter, I want to talk about the contextual taskbar and the generative fill AI features of Photoshop. This has been updated over the past few years, and I'm sure it will continue to improve. You can see if I select the shape versus an image, the options change. You can see under shape, it has a lot of the same options that we would have if I had my shape tool open. So if you don't have the contextual taskbar open, know that you can get to some of these options for changing things like the color of my shape. So say I want to pick a different color. These are recently used colors, or you can open up these different folders or go to a custom color picker by going to this little box right there. This new color picker window will open, and then you can change the color completely to anything up here. Once I click OK, it's going to change the color of that layer. But now we have those options here. So same thing, we can get to our colors for that shape here, rather than having to switch to the shape tool to get to them up on this taskbar up here. With the images, there's a lot of cool features like selecting our subject, which will automatically find the subjects in our image. And from there, we can do all sorts of things, such as copying and pasting to a new layer. So if I press Command C and then Command V, it will copy just that selection, that's what that's called, to a new layer. And if I turn off this background, we can see that, look at that, it removed that background. Or I'm going to delete that now. Similarly, and we're going to choose Generate, and now it's going to create a background for this entire image based off of what the subject was. So now we have this Gen AI option that it created. Now I'm going to increase the size of this here so you can see the variations that it has created. You can also see that it says 1 of 3 here, and we can scroll through these different options and pick the one that we like. And then once you're happy with that, you can just click off of that layer and it becomes a new layer in our image. So just like that, we have this really cool design of our meditating lady on this sketched background on this yoga mat. Very, very cool. Now that was the process for when we remove the background. Let me go to our history, and I'm going to back up before we remove the background. So that's how you can change the background of an image quickly. I'm going to remove this background again really quickly just to show you another option for using this contextual taskbar. And we have to use another tool to do this. The one that I'm going to do is the lasso tool. So if you click and hover over this, go to lasso tool. And what this does is it allows us to create a selection on our canvas. And then within that selection, we can generate any sort of image. For example, if I click and drag over here, this is where I want to generate sitting on a photorealistic puffy cloud. Generate. Prompt engineering, or how we write our prompts, is going to change a lot about the types of designs we create in terms of the styles. Is it photorealistic? Is it sketched? Is it moody? Is it bright? All kinds of things that you can play around with. And similarly, now we have these different options. Now, if we're not happy with these options, we can click Generate again. And now maybe we've found one that looks a little bit more realistic, something like this. Now, if we like this one, but we want maybe something similar but different, you can hover over these three dots here and choose Generate Similar. And it will generate a few options similar to the one that it already created. So now we have these three additional options, and I actually like this first one kind of the best. And you'll notice that what it created is a new layer based off of the selection or the area we created with the lasso tool. And I can turn this on or off. And if I turn the rest of the layers on, you can see that it actually generated part of our lady that's sitting there, part of the background, to match the color and what's going on in the background. I'm actually going to delete this rectangle because we don't need it now. Now you could just keep creating things and adding to the design with the lasso tool. There are other ways to create shapes, like the marquee tool up here. And again, you can click and choose the right one. So if I select elliptical, I can go here and just say a bright sun. And so here we have some different options, and because I wasn't too specific with the style, it gave me one that was just an illustrated one. These look all right, but let's change this to a photo of a bright sun. And so now we have a couple more realistic views of what the sun would look like if you had taken a photo like this, of this lady floating in the sky on a cloud. All right, so that's enough for now with the contextual taskbar and with the generative fill options. We'll be seeing a lot more of this in our projects at the end of the crash course. In this next section of the crash course, I want to go over some of the popular tools over here. You can also click this little arrow button to condense this tool menu up here, and it might be a little easier to see. I've also added our second image of our meditating dude over here. So the most popular tools that I personally use are the move tool, the title tool. So with the title tool, you can just select that tool, click onto your canvas, and it will create some just placement text. And then you can type in whatever you want, meditation. Now it uses the fonts and the style from my previous projects, and that's great if you want to use the style that you've used for your previous project. However, if I want to change this, I can highlight this text and I can go up here, or if you have your character panel over here, you can open that and you can choose a different font. So here, open up all your fonts, and if you just hover over a font, you can see a preview of it, what it would look like. If you know a specific font, you can type it in. For example, I use Fat Frank often for my projects, and so you can choose that. You have all sorts of different options for your fonts, such as the size, which you can also change by hovering over the size text here and clicking and dragging to the right or left. And that's the same with all of these options. For example, the tracking or the spacing between letters here, you can adjust that. If you want to get to your default, you can just select 0, which is the standard for any font. Below, we have options. Right now, it's all caps. And depending on the font or depending on what you typed in, I think I capitalized it when I typed it in, but now it is not all caps. Now that's one way to adjust text, but you can also use the move tool and select your text, move it around, and see how it has a bounding box around it. So here, and if you don't see that bounding box, make sure you have this show transformed controls up here. Now we can just adjust the size here with these transform tools. Right now, I can't go in and make adjustments to the characters though, unless I double click into this text, and I can make those adjustments once you're in that title tool. So the text tool, lots more to learn, but that's one of my favorite tools. The other is the shape tool. We already saw this, but I do want to just mention a couple quick things. So if you select the shape tool, before you create a shape, you can change the color, which is the fill. So that's the interior color of your photo of your shape. You can also add a stroke, which is the boundary or the edge. So right now we don't have a stroke, but let me just add a black stroke, and the pixel width I'm going to make bigger. We can adjust this later on. But now I'm just going to click and drag this over our text, and I'm going to put it underneath our meditation text. A couple cool things to note. One is we have this rounded corners option. So that's this little circle in the corner that we can now take in and quickly create rounded rectangles. Back here, we can change the stroke. So if we want to make it bigger or smaller, we can just actually hover over the stroke and click and drag right or left. Maybe I don't want a stroke at all. And with the fill, something more of a design theory thing that I often like to choose colors from within my photo to use for my shape, at least as inspiration. So to pick a specific color within my image, I'm going to go to my color picker here. And now if I hover over my image, I can see that my mouse turns into this eyedropper. And maybe I'll pick this sort of blue from his pants and click OK. And so now that image, that shape, sort of matches what's going on in the image, which is kind of nice. Now, after the fact, I can go in and I can adjust the size of this however I want. A quick tip, if you ever want to align two layers to each other, so I know that this text is somewhat aligned with the shape layer, but if I want it perfectly aligned, I can select these two layers by shift-clicking the two layers. If I go to my Move tool now, I can choose to align. So I can align them center vertically, center horizontally. You could also left justify both of them, bottom left justify if that's what you're going for. But generally for this kind of thing, I would want to center justify vertically and horizontally. You have a lot of controls up here for aligning layers if you have your multiple layers selected. Now that's the shape tool where you can create sort of typical standard shapes. There are some really cool ways to create custom shapes with the pen tool, but the one I want to mention is the curvature pen tool. So if I select that, now I'm going to change the color. This time I want to keep that color vibe, but make it a little bit brighter. So I'm just going to take that to the left in this color picker window. And now what I'm going to do with the pen tool is just start clicking. And you'll see that as I start to click, it creates this shape that is naturally curving around each point that I create. And then once I complete that shape by selecting the last one, it is now a complete shape. To move it around, I would want to go back to my Move tool, which is also a V on my keyboard shortcut. And so now we have this cool sort of shape that can create sort of a custom border around this image. Let me make this image bigger. So I'm going to just select it, Option, drag, go back to my shape. I'm going to duplicate this layer quickly by Option clicking it. Option clicking a layer and dragging it actually creates a duplicate layer. If I want to create another shape, I can go back to my pen tool. Maybe this time I want to have a different color, something that contrasts. Maybe we can start with his hair, and if that's like a nice sort of yellowy gold, we can maybe do that. And because I had that shape layer selected, it changed that shape. But this is where you might want to start a new layer, and you can do that by clicking new layer, and with the curvature pen tool in here, I can go in and create another shape. And again, if I had changed the color before or now, I can change that color. If you ever want to get back into the shape itself and make adjustments, just have that layer selected, select the curvature pen tool, and then when you click on the edge of this shape, you can go in and you can move these points around. There's other ways to add points by just adding a new one, or deleting a point by selecting one and pressing the delete key on your keyboard. And this is going to take time and practice to learn what you need to do to make shapes with the curvature pen tool or just the regular pen tool. But that's a really cool tool. The last tool I want to mention right now is this selection tool, the quick selection tool. So if I hover over this selection tool and go to quick selection tool, this is a way that we can select parts of our image, which I'm going to get to by turning off all of these other layers. And this was the previous way that you would select subjects. You would have to do it manually without this quick select subject option in the contextual taskbar. But to make a selection, you would want to choose your layer, and then you would click and drag over the part of the image that you want to select. And you can see that as I do it, I'm still clicking and dragging. It is selecting parts of this image based off of the colors, the contrast of what I'm clicking and dragging. So now I have this selection of just the man's torso. I can add or subtract to this selection. Say I don't want his shorts in there. I can choose the subtract selection tool, and I can go in here, and it does a pretty good job at selecting just that. Maybe I just want his t-shirt. So I'm going to subtract his face, go in here, go back, add. I can just press the option key down to get the subtract tool. So you don't have to go back up here with the mouse. You can just have your mouse selected. And so this does a pretty good job at selecting our t-shirt. So what can we do with this? Well, from here we could copy and paste it, and now we just have his floating t-shirt. We can also improve this selection. We'll see this much more in depth throughout this course, but we can choose when we have this selection tool on, we see this option for select and mask. And now we have these refinement options. Now, if you are opening this up for the first time, it won't be set to these settings. It'll be set to some default ones. But here you can see that we have an option for edge detection and smart radius that we can turn on or off. And this is going to do things like look at the edge of the object that I'm selecting, look at the contrast of it, and try to make a better selection. We can shift the edge of this by percentage to increase it or decrease it, something like this. We can even go in here now and we can really zoom in with the Z keyboard shortcut to zoom in, and then go back to our selection tool, and we could paint on to make sure that we get his shirt, holding the option key to subtract again. I don't want to get his skin or the background. I just want to get his shirt. Notice what I'm doing now. I'm moving around this image by pressing the space bar, which gives me this hand tool. And you can do this not within this refinement window, but also just back in any canvas. You can press the space bar and move around as well as the zoom. So now I'm going to zoom out. So now we have a pretty good selection. And then down here, we can choose what we want to do with the selection after we click OK. We can just create a new mask with it. We can just create a selection. We could open it up as a new document. What I typically do is a new layer with a layer mask, and we're going to click OK. Now it turned off the background, but what we can do is we can turn that background back on. Now we can do all kinds of things like change the color of the shirt with adjustments, which brings us to our next section of this crash course on making adjustments to layers. We can add an adjustment down here by clicking that adjustment icon and choosing the adjustment we want to make. Or if we go up to Window and turn on our adjustments, we can see those same ones up here. It's just a little easier visually to see. So if we want to change the color of something, we can go to Hue, Saturation, and notice how it creates this adjustment layer. Now what's going to happen if I adjust the hue here is it's going to adjust it to the entire image, which is kind of trippy and cool. I'm going to reset that slider by double clicking it. But if we just want this adjustment to apply to the layer underneath it, this shirt that we created, we can select this option here. And now it's going to adjust the hue, or the color really, of just that shirt. Pretty cool, huh? So maybe we want something a little more vibrant. We can adjust the saturation as well. Now I want to zoom out again and see this whole image, and that's pretty cool. So now if we turn on or off this layer, we can see the original and the new. Blends in pretty nicely, right? So that's how you apply an adjustment to a specific layer. Now say we want to apply another adjustment to this whole photo. We can click on adjustments. We can go to brightness and contrast, for example, and we could move this brightness and contrast up or down, and it will affect everything below it unless we choose this option right here, which is a clipping mask option. So if you hear clipping mask, that's what this is. But now if we adjust the brightness, say we want to make it bright, a little brighter, contrastier, we can do that to this image. Very stylized, and that's to the whole image. Again, if we just did it to the layer below, it would just apply, and you can see this by turning it on or off, to the shirt. I'm going to undo that by pressing that button again. Now this is the right way, I would say, to make adjustments to an image. Let me turn this off really quickly and show you one other way you can do this, which is up through our image menu. So if you have an image and you want to make an adjustment to it, you can get to those same adjustments up here, but look what happens. So if I go to brightness and contrast, we get this same options, but in a different window. And we can do the same thing. We can make it brighter and contrastier. However, if I click OK now, what happens is that edit is burned into this layer. And I cannot go back and adjust it back to what it was. It's a destructive edit. So if you hear that term non-destructive editing, that's what we're doing with these adjustment layers here, because I'm going to undo that now. With any of these adjustment layers, we can go in here and under properties, this is when you would want to have the properties tab open, we can go back in here and make adjustments. If I want to take down that brightness, say it was a little bit too much, or go to the hue saturation of that shirt and say, actually, let's see about sort of a green shirt. Maybe that looks kind of cool. That's non-destructive editing, meaning we can always go back and make the adjustments, change it, fix it, improve it, however we would like. The next thing I want to show you is blending modes and opacity. This is a fairly simple concept. If I add in this light leak layer, for example, and let's just make it the same size as our graphic, I want to be able to show the image beneath this light leak layer. And there's different ways to do this. One is just through opacity. So that's the opaqueness of an image. So 0% opaque means it's transparent, or you can increase it all the way to 100%, and that's completely opaque and not see-through. However, for this image, you might want something like this. This is kind of cool if we want it sort of as like a background image, and then we could add text. Let me move this text on top of it. And that's kind of cool. We could even have another like layer down here with like the time. You saw that I just option dragged that text layer. Mondays at 10 a.m. And then I can take my move tool, shrink this down. Cool, right? So kind of a cool graphic. However, this light leak is really meant to just add this warmth in the top corner, and then this dark part, I don't want it to be visible. And to make this work, we actually have to change the blend mode. So for any layer, we have the blend mode here, which is normal, but we can scroll through these and you can see what this does. It combines the images in different ways. And so for something like screen or lighten, what it does is it makes the darker parts of the image transparent, and then the brighter parts of the image are not transparent. So for this image with the bright highlights in the top corner, it makes those transparent. So you can see for this image, it leaves the lens flare, but it gets rid of the darker parts, and you can see this turn on or off, and that's actually pretty cool. Adds more style to this image. And so play around with your blend modes. We have a full section on this later in the course explaining what most of them do. But this brings me to another important skill, which I briefly mentioned before, the layer mask. To explain this, I'm actually going to open up another image as a project. This is something that I didn't explain earlier on, but sometimes you might just want to open up an image as a project. So if I have an image in my documents, I can just drag it into my Photoshop icon, or say open with and choose the application, and it will just open up that image as a project in the same exact aspect ratio and dimensions as the original photo. You can also do that by going up to File and opening here. So now we have this image and it's locked as the background, so I'm going to unlock that. And I'm going to create a layer mask. So to do that, I'm going to drag it into this layer mask icon down here. Now, this is confusing, I know, but we're going to get through it together. Over on the right-hand side, it has created this layer mask, and this is all white. Remember that white means opaque and black means transparent. This mask is something that we can edit now. We can edit it with different things, but one tool we can edit it with is the brush. So if we go to the brush tool, or if we press B on our keyboard, we can actually brush parts of this image. So with this selected, and make sure that the layer mask is selected, we can brush parts of it black. And we know we're going to brush parts of it black because we have black selected here. So if I brush here in the middle, you can see that it's making what's in the middle transparent. And you can see that it matches what's down here on the right side with this layer mask. Whatever I paint black, I'm erasing. Now this is non-destructive editing. You might be wondering how I erase a part of an image. This is the best way to do it because it's non-destructive. We can go back and get this part of the image back by painting white. So I switched to white, and I can just paint on. Now a keyboard shortcut to remember is the X key, because this switches our paintbrush from black to white when we have a layer mask. If for some reason your colors get messed up, just click this color and choose white or black. Because if it's on a different color, it's not going to work properly. This is how you can blend images together. For example, say I have this cloudy image and I have it up here like so. I'm going to put this underneath our layer with the layer mask. And now I'm going to erase the part of the sky. Remember, what color is it to erase? Black. So now I'm going to erase that part of the sky, and we have this sky sort of blending in with our layer. Now we could use Gen AI to blend this even better, but this is sort of the old school way of blending images together. And you can get more realistic or more creative as well. This is sort of a creative look. Now, I wanted to talk about layer masks because if I go back to this light leak, I like it, but I don't like how it sort of makes it harder to see our subject. So I want to erase that part of this image with a layer mask. So I'm going to drag our light leak into the layer mask. Similarly, I now have my brush on, and I can adjust my brush settings, something I didn't mention up here. You could change the size up here, the hardness. So back on this image here, let me show you what it would be like to have a hard brush. X to get black. See how it has like a hard edge versus if I have a very soft edge, it's sort of feathered out. You can also change the size of a brush. This is a really, really handy keyboard shortcut with the Option Control buttons or Alt Control if you're on a PC. That might be Alt Command actually on a PC. And you can click and drag right or left to make bigger or smaller, or up or down to make harder or softer. This is a super handy keyboard shortcut to use. So now back on this image, if I want to get rid of this part of the layer mask, I just make sure I have my black brush up, and I'm just going to paint off sort of that middle part of this lens flare image, which just makes our subject stand out a little bit better. So that's a quick crash course of layer masks within this crash course. And we'll be practicing more of that later on with our projects. All right, we are moving through this crash course, and we're going to get to the project soon, which will be a really fun way to put everything together. Only a couple more important things that you need to know in Photoshop. One is layer styles. So for any layer, you can double click and it will open up all of these different styles. Some I use more often than others. Things like adding a drop shadow to our layers is cool if you want them to sort of stand out in a 3D-ish way. You could adjust how the shadow looks, the angle, all of that here. You can also add things like an outer glow, which is very cool, and just by selecting that, you can get to the different settings. You could change the color. Say we want more like a pink glow. We can do that, and we need to change, now that we know about blend modes, we could change, like if we just want a solid pink glow, you can change that blend mode to normal, etc. Stroke, that's kind of cool for text as well. All kinds of cool stuff, and this is not just for text layers. I'm going to cancel that, but this is also for image layers. Now, something I want to do here, just to make this look kind of cool, is I can select my subject, and I'm just going to copy and paste that into a new layer and put this layer on top of our text. And now we can double click this layer of our image, and same thing, we could add sort of a drop shadow to it. We could even add a stroke to it, which is kind of cool. Change the color, all that. Some of these don't really apply or won't be easily seen for different types of images, like inner glow or inner shadow. But if you did pattern overlay, for example, that's going to fill the shape with a pattern. Now you could select your patterns here, all kinds of cool stuff. Get really funky with this. You could also import patterns, and you can make adjustments to these patterns in all kinds of ways. And once you're happy with your layer styles, you can click OK. And you'll see that underneath our layer, we have these effects. Now, what's cool about this is we can apply these effects to another layer quickly. For example, if we just right-click this and we choose Copy Layer Style, we can now go to our text layer, same thing, right-click, and paste layer style right here. Turn them on or off if you want, and that gives us a pretty cool look. So those are layer styles. Now I'm going to change this text to filter and blurs. Let's do and blurs on the same line because that's the next section of this crash course. You can apply filters of all kinds to different images, and different layers. We can do that by selecting a layer down here and going up to filter, and there's all sorts of different filters. Some of the more popular ones, for example, if I select my background, maybe I want to now make my background blurrier. We can go up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. This is a popular one that looks sort of like a realistic camera blur. Make it super out of focus. Something like that's pretty cool. And similarly, we have these filters. They're smart filters that you could turn on or off. Photoshop is always adding different types of filters. And if I go up to filter with this layer selected, if I go to neural filters, this is going to open up a new window where you can do things like smoothing skin. Depending on the image, you can do like super zoom to increase the resolution. You can add makeup to your image. If you don't have these filters, you just click the download and it will just import the assets it needs to use this filter. For this one, for example, it needs a reference image. So you would just find an image online or from your computer and open up that image. It has the smart portrait feature where you can actually increase or decrease the age of a person, the happiness. You can give them a different expression. And this is going to look better if you have a photo of someone smiling with their face and eyes. It's harder with the sunglasses. And now that was applied to this layer, so I can undo that if we don't want that. You could also output it to a new layer if you want to do it in a non-destructive way. So those are filters and blurs. There are a ton of them, and we'll see a couple more in our projects, but that is where you can get to them. Once you're done with a project, or if you're in the middle of a project and you need to save it, you can do so by going up to File and choosing Save, or Control S or Command S on a Mac. This will open up the Save window, and if you have a Adobe Creative Cloud account, you can save your files to the cloud. I personally like saving them to the computer, so I have access to them even if I'm not connected to the internet. And so here you choose your computer, you can choose where you want it. I'll call this PS Crash Course for Photoshop Crash Course. And for format, you generally want to save it as a Photoshop file so that you can open it up later on. So for example, if I exit out of this project with that little X, now in my welcome screen, if I open up the next time, I can open up this PSD file. I can send it to someone to edit. I can open it up on another computer. It's all going to be within that Photoshop file. But that Photoshop file is not one you would share on Instagram or send to print or put on a website. You would need to export it as a different type of image. So under File, you have a quick export as PNG option under Export. And that's like a very quick way to do it. PNG files are really great for posting online and all sorts of things. So you might want to do that. So if I just click Save, it's going to save it as a PNG, and I can find that in my Finder. Or if you want to customize your save settings, you can choose Save, Export, Export As. And now we have our Export As window. Here we can choose the format. You might want to choose JPEG, which is going to be a smaller file size, yet still high quality. You could choose the quality. So high, like 6, is still going to be super good quality. If you're just trying to save space on your computer, or perhaps you're just trying to send a sample to someone you're working with, but not the final result, you might just lower that quality. You can also adjust the final size of your image. For example, maybe you're posting to a social media platform where the ideal size is 1500 by 1500 pixels, and you want to save it exactly as that. You can do that here. And once you have all of your settings correct and what you want, you can choose export. You then choose where you want to save it. And now we have this file in our documents that I can share online, I can email, I can post wherever, and that is a nice JPEG file. So that's a quick rundown of how to save and export your files for all kinds of purposes. So this was a crash course in Photoshop. It probably felt a little bit like a crash course, like I was going fast. You might not know everything. You might be like, I need to rewatch this again. But before you do that, I think we should actually put what we've learned into practice, because by actually creating some designs like these ones here, we will actually see how we can use everything we've learned so far, plus some new tips and tricks to create some designs that are worthy of sharing and posting online and actually utilizing for any sort of business, brand, or personal use. So let's go ahead and get started with these projects.